The most exciting thing that I could do on a Saturday afternoon was go to the movies with my friend Linda. Oh, the movies were so much fun back then, but it wasn't really the main feature that we loved. It was the candy and the cartoons. My mother kept a jar of coins on the windowsill in the kitchen, and I was allowed to help myself to coins for lunch money for school, or for school needs, or for the good humor man when we heard his bells tinkling their way down the street, and also for the movies on Saturday afternoon. 65 cents was a windfall. That would account for 35 cents for an under age 12 ticket into the movies, 20 cents for bus fare, 10 cents each way, going up and down Avenue U because the theater was about 1.5 miles away, and 10 cents left over for candy. It didn't take long before Linda and I figured out that if we walked to the theater, we could have twice as much money for candy. And so it was a crisp day in early December. Linda and I were walking down the avenue to go to the movies. We were taking our time. Back then, we didn't concern ourselves with show times. We just got there when we got there. And if it was in the middle of a movie, we sat down and watched it. And when the movie was over, we stayed in our seats till it started again and left when we got caught up to where we had walked in. The best part about going to the movies was not the feature. It was the cartoons. My favorite was Mr. Magoo, and all his misadventures were based on the fact that he was nearly blind. And I know in today's world that's an insensitive way to treat children's humor, but it was the 50s. We thought it was hilarious. But we also thought that Elmer Fudd's speech impediment, I thought a putty cat, was endlessly amusing. And for violence, well, the violence was mild-mannered and also comical, like every time Felix the cat got his tail tied to an exploding cannonball. And for suspense and drama, you couldn't beat the mild-mannered detective, Charlie Chan, and his 5 numbered sons. So, it had been a very satisfying afternoon at the movies. We had walked there, and when it was over, I was surprised as we exited the theater how gray the sky was. There was even a little bit of snow flurry activity happening. We walked over to the bus stop. Linda fished around in her pocket for her dime fare. She boarded the bus. I didn't have to fish around for my dime. I knew perfectly well where it was. In the cash register of the candy counter inside the Avenue U Theater, I had spent all my transportation money on candy. Don't worry about me. You go. I'm just going to walk home. Okay, she said. The doors of the bus closed, and it took off down the avenue. Almost immediately, the weather turned wetter and more harsh. The temperature was dropping by the minute. It didn't take long before my nose was stinging and my toes and fingers began to feel numb. I stopped at each store awning and waited for a minute, hoping the weather would let up, but when I saw it was only getting worse, I just continued. At one point, I stepped off the street and landed in a puddle, an icy cold puddle. My feet, my shoes, my socks were instantly freezing. There was nothing to do. I couldn't even pull them up out of my shoes. They were so wet and uncomfortable. At one point, though, I caught my reflection in a store window. My whole head was covered with snow and my shoulders. I look like an angel. Well, when you're young, the door to make-believe is always open. Without a moment's thought or self-consciousness, I lifted my arms and I began to skip-step down the street, pretending I was an angel flying. And I kept that up till I got to the corner and had to wait for the light to change amid a group of some very serious-looking grown-ups. The atmosphere had changed, too. There was a sense of urgency. Pedestrians and motorists were rushing to get to their destinations ahead of this coming storm. I was really cold and really wet, and I was really sorry I had spent all my money on candy. But there was nothing to do except continue walking. So I buckled down to it and I walked as fast as I could. And finally I reached home. I climbed carefully up the brick steps of my stoop, which was already covered with snow that was getting a little icy. And I let myself in. My mother called out, "Is that you, Madeline?" "Yes, Mom, I'll be right there." I kicked off my wet shoes. I ran upstairs and took off my wet socks. I draped them over the edge of the bathtub and put on a pair of dry socks. Oh, they felt so good. And then I took a towel and tried to dry my hair a little bit. And I went down into the kitchen. Normally, my mother would ask me about my afternoon. Where did you go? What did you see? Who went with you? Did you see any of your friends from school? But on this day, she was totally silent. She didn't ask a single question. I began to get nervous. This was unusual and very uncomfortable. So I began to kind of babble. "Oh, we had such a good time, Mommy. You know, it was so nice. You know what? There were 4 cartoons. There were 2 Daffy Ducks and 2 Mr. Magoo's." And she turned around and said, "I know." Linda came over. She wanted to see if you made it home okay. And she told me all about it. Oh, that Linda, she spilled the beans. But I didn't know how many beans she had spilled, so I was afraid to say anything for fear of giving out any more detrimental information. I just sat there with my wet head and drenched in guilt while my mother glared at me. And then she said, "3 candy bars, Madeline. 3 candy bars." And she was just about to launch into what I knew was going to be an incredible tirade, and I was saved by the bell. Literally, I was saved by the bell. Ping, the kitchen timer went off. My mother was distracted. She looked at it. She opened the oven door and peered in. Then she grabbed a dish towel and holding it by either end, she used it like a pair of pot holders and retrieved a pan of roasted chicken parts and put it on the table. She was just about to resume her reprimand when we heard the door open. It was my father coming home from work. She shook her head. Just set the table. Oh, I was so injured by her disapproval. I ate everything on my plate that night, even my mother's horrible overcooked string beans. I was working so hard to get back in her good graces. But she was cold and non-communicative throughout the whole dinner. When we finished our meal, I helped clear the dishes and put them in the sink. Then I sat back down while my mother went to the refrigerator and retrieved a tray of little pudding cups, chocolate pudding, with marshmallows melted on the top. One of my favorites. She handed one to my father. She placed one at her seating. And then she gave all my siblings a portion. I sat there quietly. She looked at me. A little smile broke on her face. She handed me the last cup, and I knew I was forgiven.